Ooh. Hello, YouTubers! My name is Willie. Welcome to my channel. Today I have reaction request 112. Arch's take on the Bolter, Weapons of Angels. And this has been requested by Brutality616. So let's check it out. Let's see if it'll start for me. Play. Dun 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 dun.
Greetings and salutations,
Greetings.
friends, and welcome back to more Warhammer 40k lore.
Pretty jacket.
Today we're going to have a look at a rather
Nice.
iconic weapon of the 41st millennium, the Adeptus Astartes
Very
bolt gun.
iconic.
Now, of course, the Adeptus Astartes are not the only fighting force to utilize the bolter, but they are nevertheless inextricably linked to one another. Because after all, the Space Marine and his bolt gun has become the iconic piece of imagery for the entirety of the 40k universe.
Ain't that
to
the
the point
truth?
where even a normie that has next to no understanding of the universe at all might just be able to recognize the Space Marine and his favorite weapon. And there is a very good reason for this, for why it's so memorable and so iconic. Because the bolter is very unique in its look, its operation, and its design, and in what it does, especially when you compare it to the weapons of other big sci-fi universes.
Oh
Let's
yeah?
first have a look at perhaps one of the most well-known, Star Trek's Phaser. It's sleek,
Oh.
it's elegant, it's small, and hell, it barely even looks like a weapon.
I
It looks
know.
like almost some sort of magic wand.
Or
And
TV
to be
remote.
fair, it's not really a weapon, pure and simple. It is far more along the lines of a multi-purpose tool than simply an instrument for killing. And of course, this perfectly reflects the ideology and the morals of the people using it. The
Yeah.
Federation Starfleet is not a conquering army. It is not even a primarily
Yeah,
military
they're an
organization at heart.
Inquisitor,
Rather, its goals have far more to do with the
investigation,
ideas of exploration,
exploration,
and scientific
yes,
endeavor than
exploration.
necessarily the conquest and subjugation of other species and planets. And even if we look at an instrument specifically designed for killing, like the Mark III phaser rifle, you can still see the overriding design elements. In this case, it is recognizable
Yeah.
as a weapon, as a rifle, but it is still sleek, rounded, elegant, and futuristic. Let's look at another
Very
popular
curvy.
science fiction weapon, the E11 Blaster Rifle. In this case, it looks decidedly cruder, understandably so, since the original weapons were based on World War II era weapons, and that is
Oh.
a theme that continues to this very day.
Well, there
But
you
it's clear
go.
that they were going for more of a science fiction-y look. The weapon is rounded, it's sleek, it's almost elegant in its own way, and of course, like the phaser, they don't fire bullets. Instead, they fire futuristic-looking beams, or bolts of energy, or laser
Lasers.
rounds.
Yeah.
In other words, they suggest to you a far-flung future,
Lasers.
where humanity has evolved and changed, and developed new and interesting technology that we ourselves do not yet
I
have
still-
full access to.
My
Then
brother and
compare
I
it to the Imperial bolt gun.
think that
There is
Han
nothing
Solo
subtle about the bolter.
should
There
have
is no
had an
mistaking
old,
its
busted,
intentions.
rusted
It is
revolver
a weapon,
instead of
pure and simple.
a
There's nothing
blaster.
elegant about it. There's nothing sleek.
would've been
There's
more
nothing
his style.
rounded. There's nothing sexy.
Bear.
It's got a
Don't
beauty in its
growl.
own robust, brutish way, but there's
Ugh.
nothing futuristic in it. There's nothing that invokes images of a far-flung future when you look at this thing. It's simply a very large gun. And that brute simplicity is such a major part of its charm. It tells
Yes.
you everything you need to know about 40k. It tells you that this is a violent universe, a dark universe, a brutish universe. It doesn't
There
try
you
to
go.
please the eye with sleek curves or soft edges. It doesn't try to deceive you into thinking humanity has somehow evolved by firing some fancy high-tech laser beam. It doesn't try to coddle you in any way. It is a simple tool of destruction and murder,
There you
wielded
go.
by giant, hulking monstrosities clad in power armor, who are themselves stark and immediate reminders that this is a universe that requires warriors like them,
Yeah.
not Federation officers in brightly coloured sweaters, or space knights with codes of chivalry wielding elegant weapons from a bygone age. And ironically
True
enough,
that.
it is this base nature that lends it its air of uniqueness, that makes it so different from all of the other weapons. Despite it just simply being a very large gun, it nevertheless is something unique, something interesting, something that nobody else really has, because nobody else really has a universe quite like 40k.
True.
And of course, it does not merely
True.
just look brutish. It is not even just merely a big gun. In fact, it would probably be closer to the truth to call it a fully automatic grenade launcher. Not quite a rocket launcher, mind you, for it does not fire the rockets. It launches the grenade from the gun, much like an ordinary round, but upon clearing the weapon, the grenade then becomes a self-propelled weapon, guided by miniature rocket engines. And of course, said self-guided rounds are explosive. In fact, they are essentially high-explosive grenades. The weapon itself is something along the
Brilliant.
lines of a 0.75
Brilliant.
caliber, although this does vary quite considerably on the various patterns of bolters. For example, there are 65 and 65 caliber bolters as well, but the general standard issue Goodwin pattern bolter is a 0.75, which means it would translate somewhat roughly into a 20mm cannon. You know, the kind of gun you would usually use against airplanes. And no, that is not at all an exaggeration, because the rounds they are firing are basically flak rounds, except they have been specifically designed to hurt squishier things as well. So how does
There
all
you
of
go.
this work then? How and why has the bolter been designed in the way it has? Well, first and foremost, the basic operation of the weapon is quite simple, and very much so reminiscent of many other automatic weapons. There are variations, but for the purposes of this video, we will look at the most common type of bolter, the Mark 5B Goodwin pattern. The ammunition, in this case the bolts,
Okay.
are stored in a spring-loaded 30-round sickle magazine, which is slotted in under the weapon. The operator pulls back the firing bolt once to load a round into the chamber, and the weapon is then locked and loaded. One pull of the trigger then sends the firing pin hammering into and detonating a conventional propellant charge at the base of the bolt round. This pushes the bolt round itself out of the barrel. The recoil from the propellant charge is then also used to push the loading bolt back, ejecting the spent cartridge. And now that all the force that pushed the bolt back initially has dissipated, the bolt travels back to a closed position,
Okay.
scooping up and chambering a fresh bolt round in the process. And all of this is pretty basic stuff, but the bolt round itself is a bit special. Once the round leaves the barrel, it ignites a solid fuel rocket propellant charge. And at this
Well,
point,
there
the
you
bolt
go.
is no longer a mere projectile propelled by the force of the explosion that originally pushed it out of the barrel, but rather a fully rocket-propelled grenade. And to ensure that the bolt remains steady in its flight towards the target, it is equipped with a miniature gyro stabilizer, and many rounds also impart spin onto the grenade via slanted nozzles around the grenade's base. The interior of the bolt is made up primarily by the main explosive charge, along with a super dense material core to add weight, momentum, and penetrating power to the round. The main charge is also linked to a mass reactive fuse created to detonate the charge with a split second's delay so as to ensure the detonation takes place inside the victim, where maximum damage can be done.
There you
And
go.
now, obviously, the primary killers here is the sheer kinetic force of a 20mm rocket round and the high explosive core, but the round is also sheeted in a thin, high-quality steel sleeve that can create considerable quantities of shrapnel should the Astartes, on the occasion, miss the target, but still want a chance of maiming anything within a certain distance.
Nice.
Finally, The Warbow is capped with a diamantine penetration tip to ensure it can punch through pretty much any conventional body armor. Now, this might seem like a wee bit of overkill. After all, what really requires a 20mm high explosive round to put down?
A lot of things in this universe.
If you see the kind of nonsense the Space Marines are expected to deal with on a regular basis, you might start realizing that it's not so much overkill as it might actually be underkill, considering some of the shit they're facing is literally several meter tall monster bugs from outer space who have come to devour all life in the entire galaxy, or the ancient metallic servants of star-devouring gods, or the less ancient but highly heretical servants of other, whilst not entirely star-devouring, equally cuntish deities. And whilst many of these threats were not around when the bolter was first designed for the Great Crusade and even earlier, the Thunder Warriors, the weapon was designed with the specific idea in mind that it should be able to kill anything and everything it came across, and already all the way back then, there were many, many, many bad things out in the galaxy that went bump in the night that required a fair bit more killing than what your average fully automatic weapon could provide. Plus, of course, they required a weapon big enough for the Astartes to not simply break merely by handling it. That was another prerequisite for the design of the bolt gun. The Astartes are a somewhat blunt force instrument in most cases. They have a habit of being quite forceful with their weapons, and if they were given something not suitably robust, they might simply end up breaking it. Granted, they would probably break it over the head of some vile Xeno species, but nevertheless, a broken weapon is hardly of much use to anyone. And if there is a single word that adequately describes the early patterns of bolters, like the Crusade pattern, primarily issued, as you might expect, during the Grand Crusading era, it certainly would be the word robust, as they had, amongst other things, been designed with even fewer moving parts than the modern Mark V pattern bolter. One might even go so far as to say that the early Crusade patterns were often designed not necessarily to last, but to be utilitarian, in that the various parts that once they received sufficient wear and tear could simply just be replaced, rather than repaired or in some other way fixed. This was aided by the fact that the Legion fleets often had along with them large forge ships that provided the Legions both with ammunition and considerable quantities of spare parts, which, in combination with the relatively simple design of the early
if I remember right, bolters are very sacred.
Could be produced in considerable quantities,
so
and
I
thusly
imagine
it
they
was
try to
often easier to
reuse them
simply
as
just
much as
switch
possible.
out a barrel, for example, compared to actually fixing the barrel. In comparison, these days, the Mark V bolter is definitively designed to last for as long as possible, seeing as access to replacement parts is not necessarily anywhere near as easy as it was during the Great Crusade. Those days, the Crusade pattern bolter was stamped out by the millions in the massive forges of Mars, whilst these days, every single Mark V is essentially a chapter relic, having been handcrafted in the great forges of Mars and lovingly taken care of by the tech marines of the chapter to which it has been assigned, as well as, of course, constantly maintained by the battle brother who owns it. Of course, there are some chapters who still prefer the older patterns of bolter for their robust nature, and many other chapters who prefer specific patterns over others. There are even some chapters who have manufactured their very own versions of the bolters in common usage.
Nice.
For example, the Salamanders utilize a pattern known as the Nocturne Ultima pattern, which seem to be modified Godwin pattern bolters only utilized by the Salamanders chapter. There are even unofficial patterns like, for example, the Heresy pattern, which does not refer to any specific pattern in general, but is rather a catch-all term for a wide variety of bolter patterns that were repaired or otherwise considerably modified during the Horus Heresy, where many legions and smaller formations did not have access to sufficient spare parts, and so might be forced to cannibalize one weapon to repair another, creating a wide variety of often mismatched, but at the very least somewhat functional weapons.
Makes
But
sense.
we're not going
Makes
to be getting
sense.
into all of the various patterns here. Just listing them alone would probably take a solid 10 minutes. Rather, let's move on to some of the other functionalities of the bolter. Perhaps the most important one is its ability to interface directly with the Astartes' suit of powered armor. This gives him a heads-up display letting him know exactly how many bolts he has left in the magazine, which could occasionally be useful information if you're facing down a charging orc warlord, for example. And it also gives the Marine a constant targeting display, telling him precisely where his bolt gun is pointed. The weapons machine Spirit is also able, to at least some extent, to judge distance, meaning that it can give the Marine a general indication of how he needs to aim his bolter to hit a target, say, at 1,000 meters compared to 500 meters. The standard issue Godwin pattern bolter has a relatively simple machine spirit that can give indications of range and lead time to targets up to 1,000 meters, which frankly the Space Marine will rarely need, as at that range he is going to be lethally accurate just by himself. Whilst more specialized patterns, like the Stalker for example, can give range, target data, and lead indicators up to several kilometers.
Nice.
Another feature of the bolter and power armor integration is the ability to lock the bolter onto a target. In practicality, this means that the Astartes can designate a target for the bolter to stay locked onto. This is a soft lock-on mechanic, so if the Astartes himself decides to move the bolter, his movement will automatically override the bolter's lock-on. But as long as the Astartes does not provide conflicting input, the bolter will independently feed information to the power armor, ensuring that it'll stay pointed towards the enemy. Some more advanced patterns of bolters, and occasionally also the power armor itself, or specialized types of helmets, or indeed even ammunition in some cases, might also be equipped with miniaturized Auspex technology, allowing the weapon, the armor, or indeed, as mentioned in some cases, the ammunition, to feed targeting information back to the heads-up display, allowing the Marine in question, for example, to see through walls or track targets via their thermal signatures.
Wow.
And finally, it's also important to mention the fact that the bolt gun has become far more than just a weapon within the modern Imperium of Man. It might have started out as a simple tool meant to murder a wide variety of undoubtedly evil aliens, but in the modern Imperium, it has become as much a religious relic as it has a weapon. It has, in a very literal sense, become a symbol, an icon representing the Emperor's wrath and his avenging angels. And this belief does not merely exist within the common Imperium, but also amongst the Space Marines themselves, who take incredibly good care of their weapons, and view all of them, as previously mentioned, as de facto relics of the chapter. They are even quite frequently used by non-Astartes personnel within the Imperial cult, mostly the somewhat overzealous kind of preachers, who like carrying bolters into battle, despite the fact that, once carried by a normal human, a bolt gun would be not exactly a particularly useful weapon due to its, again, somewhat severe kickback.
Yeah.
But of course, a true believer doesn't worry himself about such minor problems like his weapon not being particularly effective in his hands. He has far more potent weapons, like, for example, his belief in the God Emperor and the mighty symbol resting in his hands. Of course, some of the more logical preachers might choose to not utilize a full-sized bolter, and instead utilize a version specifically designed for normal humans. Even this miniaturized version has quite a kick, but nothing in comparison to the full-sized version, and
possibly a
honestly, even
survivable
calling
kick.
these mini bolters is, well, it is technically a correct term, but it feels inaccurate, like comparing a 50 caliber sniper rifle to a 9mm pistol. They both fire bullets, they both have barrels, and yet the differences between the two are fairly obvious. But hey, if nothing else, it certainly is a kick-ass religious symbol, and, in all due likelihood, more effective than a hammer, which is the chosen religious symbol of a certain other order that may or may not exist in the 41st millennium. And on that speculative note,
Okay.
I'll wrap up this video on the Bolter. Until next time, I've been Arch, thank you very much for listening, and I hope to see you all again soon. Have a good day.
You too. That was Reaction Request 112, Arch's take on the Bolter. Yeah, this is, was recommended to me, requested by Brutality616. Quite entertaining indeed. What I learned from it. Okay, well, I had watched a previous Bolter video, and this was quite informational as far as I did not know that they were linkable to the suits. I did not know that they made smaller versions of them. I did know that they were religious symbols, and I did know that they were cherished relics by the brothers that carried them. Yeah, I don't really have much to add to it. It's a very awesome weapon. Yeah, that's all I got to say about that. But as far as the channel goes, a couple videos back, I released a list of videos 111 through 130. That way you guys know what to expect next. Yeah, so go check that video out. Other than that, I don't think I've got much to say. Other than the usual, check out Arch's stuff. There is a link in the description. Yeah. Willie, out.
If you like the video, stay tuned for more content. And as always, feel free to comment. Have a good one.